Hello and welcome to another Total Transformation Seminar. Night by night, we've been presented with information that has the potential to have a positive effect on our physical health, our mental health, and our spiritual health. And again tonight, I'm sure our presenters will be sharing more priceless gems of information. As usual, if you have any questions during the seminars, please place them on the chat. So to get us started this evening, I'll hand over now to Juliet as she introduces our first speaker. Juliet.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. This evening, I present to you our speaker who resides in Scotland. Her name is Jackie Brown, and she's a mother, a wife. She also has extensive knowledge on all things concerning health. This knowledge she's more than happy to share with her family and friends, and also you in the wider community. This evening's topic is entitled Eat for Strength. During the presentation, if you have any questions, please place them in the chat. The next voice you'll hear is that of Jackie Brown. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be back with you, sharing with you ways and means that you can prevent and reverse. Yes, you heard me, reverse disease. And tonight, I'm going to be sharing with you things that we do to oftentimes accelerate and encourage disease unknowingly most of the time, but those things that can help us to restore. And that is our food. Food should be a joy, and food should be enjoyed. And so I hope that tonight you'll get lots of wonderful ideas as to how you can enjoy food for health and for strength. As I share my screen with you. Eat for strength. Why do I say this? Because sometimes we don't eat necessarily for strength. Sometimes we eat because we're bored. Sometimes we eat because we are upset. Sometimes we eat because, well, the food is there and yeah, everybody else is eating. But really we should eat for strength. Sometimes we eat too much. We eat till we're bursting. Is this healthy? Well, if we're having to unbutton more than 2 buttons, perhaps it's problematic, because as we carry on day by day unbuttoning after every meal, eventually we won't be able to fit into our skirt. Some people say, well, eat what makes you happy. But a happy meal is not always the best meal. If you look at these, I mean, I'm sure some of you are looking and saying, this looks delicious, but is it nutritious? It's not everything that makes you happy is good for you. Do we not say that to our children and to young people? It's not everything. It's not every food that makes us happy is actually going to, in the end, make us happy, because a lot of it leads to disease. And if we look at the typical Western diet, it leads to disease. Diseases such as high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, arthritis, and all those diseases that really, really plague us. And we've had the privilege of speaking and helping so many people reverse these diseases. So most of the time, we don't know that the happy meals aren't actually making us that happy. I think at the beginning, the taste makes us happy, but the body does not welcome it as much. These foods are usually laden with sugar. What's the problem with sugar? Well, the brain uses more energy than any other organ in the body, and glucose is its source of fuel. But too much glucose makes the brain sick, basically. It leads to loss of self-control by numbing the brain's sensors that prevents overeating. So if you're eating something sweet, your brain actually clocks off, so that when it's time to stop eating that sweet something, you don't hear, or rather the brain does not communicate that to you. It shuts it down. Too much sugar in our bodies, the brain, again, finds it difficult to process emotion. And you'll find that high sugar content in our foods, in our beverages, leads to depression. It's also linked to dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Artificial sweeteners increase the number of harmful gut bacteria. So we find that we have lots of gastrointestinal problems that we can't find the root to. Could the root be in our diets, in our foods and drinks laden with sugar? What about animal fats? Well, surely animal fats is okay. Actually, animal fats causes the number of connections in the brain to drop. It weakens the body's protection against bacteria because it weakens your immune system, which is desperately in need currently in this atmosphere of COVID. It causes inflammation. You have any inflammatory conditions? Could animal fats, as well as sugar, be the cause? Meat. What about meat? I'm sure by now you've heard quite a lot that's been said about meat. And if you are struggling, please don't be in despair. There are ways and means to cut back and slowly, hopefully, to to become completely plant-based. There are ways to replace that which you'll be losing. It causes too much blood flow to the lower parts of the brain and too little to the top parts of the brain, causing an imbalance. And you may think, well, what's wrong with the lower parts of the brain? Well, you might find that when you eat meat, or maybe you don't recognize it at this time, but there's certain things that you can't take in too readily, immediately. It releases too much acid in the body. Meat by nature is acidic, and therefore it creates a lot of acidity in the body, which causes inflammation. Now, choline is important for normal brain development, nerve function, and muscle movement, supporting energy levels and maintaining a healthy metabolism. But meat reduces the levels of choline in the system, which makes all the other processes imbalanced. A diet high in meat and cheese provides too much protein, which along with animal fat stimulates atherosclerosis, leading to heart disease. A high protein diet can also cause kidney stones, gout, cancer, decreased sexual endurance, and early sexual maturity. I don't know if you're suffering with any of these, but there is help. Your body can almost immediately begin to heal itself as you replace some of these foods. What's the problem with cheese? Surely it gives me lots of calcium. Well, unfortunately, it doesn't. It takes more calcium from you than it gives you. It causes high blood pressure and migraines. It suppresses the release of neuroadrenaline, which we need to help the brain and the body to function together. It contains casein. Casein is a protein that we as humans can't even digest. And at the moment, there are tests being done which show that it actually creates antibodies, which increase the risk of autism, various disorders, and of bipolar and schizophrenia. And these are medical and scientific research that are available for all of us to see the effects of cheese. Medical science is now coming to the forefront in blowing this trumpet against cheese, something we've all loved and thought it to be healthy. Well, the statistics go like this. The average risk of heart disease for a man eating meat, eggs, and dairy products is 30%. The risk for a man who leaves off meat by itself cuts in half to only 15% compared to 30%. However, the coronary risk of a vegetarian who leaves off meat, eggs, and dairy products drops to 4%. Well, that is a huge drop from 30 to 4%. So you might think, fine, I'm going vegan. That just sounds too good to be true. I'm going vegan, but going vegan has to be thought about. You have to be very systematic about it. It doesn't mean that you can't do it right away. It's just that how you go vegan is very important. I usually say plant-based because vegan doesn't always mean healthy, because this, after all, is vegan. If I'm having a bag of chips every single day, that's completely vegan. But is it healthy for you? Perhaps once a week, yeah, maybe twice, but every day, you'll find that will be just as bad for your health. So not all things vegan are necessarily healthy. Okay, so what can we eat? Is there a happier meal available? Oh yes, there is. We are going to get to that. But even before we get to the happier meal, one of the elements that we need desperately for our health, or for all the families, vitamin D. I've mentioned it before, but I find that it's very, very important that we talk about the need for vitamin D. The sun was shining very brightly today. However, if I am not out there getting it directly on my skin, I am not getting vitamin D. That is the best way to get vitamin D, in the natural sunlight, as the sun comes into contact with your skin. However, if that is not possible, it's crucial that we supplement during this season with liquid or tablet form vitamin D, or even you can get a spray form as well. It helps our bodies to ward off infection. It helps our immune system to fight and destroy viruses. Another very important element to our eating and our everyday health is water. We need to stop counting calories and start counting water intake. Many studies have been done which show that actually when you increase your water intake, you actually decrease in calories. It's important that we drink in between meals, not tea, not coffee, not juice, but pure water. Drink in between your meals, stopping half an hour before you eat a meal. So if you drink half an hour before a meal, you'll find that you won't need any water during the meal, and you will eat slightly less, which is why most people who start counting water intake reduce calories very quickly and very easily. You might wonder, well, how much water am I to drink? Your body weight in kgs divided by 7, and or your body weight in pounds divided by 16 will give you the right amount of water for you on a daily basis. Okay, so now what do we eat? You know, it sounds like there's nothing left. Oh, there is plenty. Nutrition is crucial to our health, to prevention and recovery from health. Our cells are formed by what we eat. When we are hungry, we shouldn't just kind of fill our stomachs with bulk, with whatever is closest to us, which makes us feel full and energized only for a short time. Instead, we should eat nutritious foods, which nourishes our cells and help them function properly. Unrefined foods are most nutritious. So instead of white rice, you replace it with brown rice. And instead of, let's say, white flour, you try brown flour. Now, I wonder if you know what the most nutritious food in the world is. It's actually mother's milk. With the exception of mother's milk, during infancy, no other food by itself provides all of the nutrients needed by humans. Therefore, making sure every meal has all the different parts that we need is of vital importance, because it will aid us in every area of life. The best diet, over and over again, scientific evidence reveal the best diet is the original diet, which consists of fruits, vegetables, grains, nuts, and seeds. By eating foods in their natural state, unrefined and without additives, many diseases can be prevented and often even reversed. And we've seen it. We've had the privilege of seeing those suffering with high blood pressure, with cholesterol, with cancer, with heart disease, recover. With fibromyalgia, I had the pleasure of seeing a beautiful woman just this past week recovered from fibromyalgia after suffering for years. So what do I eat? You're saying fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds and all these things, but how and when do I eat them? We're going to come to that shortly. Fresh fruits or vegetables, because the two need to be had at two separate meals for better digestion. Carbohydrates include rice and pasta and other grains like barley and millet and buckwheat and quinoa. There's so many wonderful carbohydrates out there which are complex and release energy slowly. So if you have diabetes, you won't have the problem of having a very high blood sugar after eating your carbohydrates, especially if you eat them in good proportion to your protein and your good fats. What are plant proteins? You have beans, you have lentils, you have chickpeas, you have tofu, you have even natural things like jackfruit. All of these are amazing for your body and make a meal complete and exciting. What about fats? Good fats include coconut oil, olives, nuts, seeds, and their butters as well. And you have also various forms of, as well as nut butters, you have seed butters as well. But then the age-old question, are you able to meet your nutrient needs on a plant-based diet? It's a very good question, because after all, we've been told over and over again that that might not be possible. And I say, well, protein can be obtained from many sources other than meat. Peas, beans, and lentils are excellent sources. Nuts are also rich in protein, and it's better if they are unflavored and unsalted. Every single one of those items you see before you are packed full of protein. You never thought there was protein in dates, did you? Nor in broccoli, but there is. There is. And if you want to know why I think like this, that's because that's what we live on. And those four are my children. They are bigger and so much healthier than I ever was at their age of 17, nearly 15, 12, and 10. And so I know what I'm talking about when you talk about plant-based eating for optimal health, especially for growing children. It is crucial that we consider every single angle. It's very important that we do consider the protein needs and all other needs that we need to grow healthfully and in balance. So what do we eat? Well, you can have this for breakfast, you can have this for lunch, or you can have this for your dinner. It's completely up to you. But for breakfast, this is what we have. We have a big bowl of a variety of different fruits. Seeing colors is fantastic because it means you're getting all the phytochemicals and nutrients from your food. And you see, the pomegranate will give you something that the kiwi wouldn't give you, and the kiwi will give you something that the apple won't give you. And so you're getting a nice balanced meal. Okay, now what? Now we have a bowl of oats with some seeds and nuts and you know, have maybe sweetened with a bit of honey and soy milk or almond milk or oat milk. There's a whole list of milk out there. And if you don't like the ones out there, you can replace with your own. It's so easy to make a simple nut milk. As long as you have nuts or seeds in your house with a bit of water and a bit of salt, voila, you'll have your own nut milk. Then besides your oats, you've got millet, you've got buckwheat, you've got quinoa, you've got a whole host of other grains, just to make things a little exciting. Or better still, make granola with those oats as well. You're still hungry? Really? Have a slice of bread, brown bread or spelt bread with some avocado. That is a complete breakfast. After that, you definitely won't be hungry if you're drinking water in between for another 4 hours. And do you know that that's what they call intermittent fasting? If you're suffering from ill health, leaving at least 4 hours between your meals is fantastic because it helps your cells to recover, it helps the food to be digested, and you are definitely going to be ready for your next meal. What about lunch? What do we do for lunch? Well, don't forget to start lunch off with a nice big salad, followed by perhaps a quinoa stir fry with lots of fresh vegetables or even frozen vegetables. Just stir fry it, a little bit of soy sauce. You can put a handful of nuts in here, or you can put some tofu in there. That is a very nice and nutritious lunch. And just in case you want a little bit of dessert, there's some homemade biscuits also to be had. So yes, on a plant-based diet, you can have your food and eat it. On top of that, you can even have your dessert. What about supper? Well, we're going to keep supper light. So perhaps a bowl of soup will do us good. And if you're not much for soup, let's try a nice big bowl of fruits. This will ensure that your body is able to digest this before you sleep. And you don't go to sleep on a full stomach, which actually is detrimental to health. On top of that, you have the fat storage, which then tells on you days to come. Special things to enjoy if you are plant-based: blackstrap molasses, crucial for iron, especially for growing children and adults alike. It's good also for pre and post operation. It's the nutrient dense nature of molasses means that even people who have diabetes can use it sparingly. It's fantastic for iron, for magnesium, potassium. Is a wonderful thing to add to your list on a daily basis. What else can we enjoy? This is fantastic. It's called yeast flakes, and it helps things to taste cheesy. And we have a wonderful dish which we make out of potato and carrots. It's a cheese dish, and we're more than happy to share the ingredients with you tonight. Okay, so now I've told you that chocolate's not the best for you because it's got caffeine. What do we replace it with? We replace it with something called carob, which is fantastic. It's full of calcium, no caffeine. It tastes even better than chocolate. Chocoholics are going to say, no way, there's nothing better than chocolate. I used to say that until I tried carob. This is the better than cheese recipe. We've called it better than cheese because truly it is better than cheese. It helps, it's digested very easily and very quickly. It's reasonable in terms of price. It's quick in terms of meal preparation. You can have this on pasta. Sometimes if we make it and it cools down, we have it on salad. You can have it on pizza. You can have it on anything. And it is better than cheese because it digests quicker and it doesn't give you that acidic state in your body. And even more dishes to make on a plant-based diet. This is made from chickpea flour. It's almost like a pancake made from chickpea flour. You can fill it with whatever filling you like and dress it with whatever vegetation. What about lasagna? Oh yes, you can still have your lasagna and eat it quite happily on a plant-based diet. The base, what you would otherwise use mince for, we use brown lentils, and we make the cheese from the cheese recipe, the better than cheese recipe that I've just shared with you. And what about shepherd's pie? We all like a good shepherd's pie. Well, this one is a shepherd's pie. Again, it's made, the base is the brown lentils. You can use any color lentils or other beans. And the top is has sweet potato instead of your white potato. So really, you will be lacking nothing. And for dessert, you can have some cornbread. Or you might prefer cornbread with your main meal. Or better still, maybe have it for breakfast. Taste and see that the Lord is good. I hope this has given you some ideas as to what you can eat.
Wow, thank you, Jackie. That was, pardon the pun, food for thought. The better than cheese recipe looks so good. So I'm sure many of us will try that one. Just a few questions before we finish off.
Sister Juliet, I can't hear you. I know you're talking to me, but I think you're muted.
No, I'm on. Can you hear me now?
Speak again, please, Sister Juliet.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Thank you so
Okay.
much. I think it was.
I'd just like to know, what time should I have my last meal?
It's better to have your last meal later 6 o'clock. After 6, naturally, as the day goes on, our metabolism slows down. So whatever we have after 6, especially if you're having a big meal, is going to just be stored as fat. And it's going to disturb your sleep and make you feel quite sluggish in the morning. So if you're going to have to eat after 6 because of work commitments and picking up children and whatever you have to do, then make it light.
Okay, thank you. Question. Somebody says they have oats every day. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? They believe it's good for them. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, oats are very versatile grain. It's very good that you have oats. Perhaps you can start your oats with a bowl of fruits first and then have oats. But once you get tired of oats, you can try other things like millet. You have a buckwheat as well. And you can use the same oats to make granola so that you have a nice variety, and breakfast becomes more exciting. But if you like your oats, I agree, oats is very nice.
Another question. Somebody's hooked on having bacon and sausage for breakfast, an old English fry-up. They want to change, yes, but is finding it difficult to change. What should they do?
Okay. An old English fry-up. You can still replicate an old English fry-up on a plant-based diet. Maybe try the oats and the millet and so on. However, if maybe a few times a week you want to do your fry-up, you can have plant-based sausages. You can actually replicate eggs with tofu, and you can actually make your own baked beans. There's a nice fry-up. The bacon, there are plant-based alternatives that look like and even taste like bacon. So really you're missing nothing, and you're getting all your usual favorites.
Mm-hmm. How much green vegetables should I eat?
As much as you can.
How much green
vegetables? Nah, I don't think so. It used to be that we were told 5 a day. but did you know that that's been revised to 10 a day? So green vegetables, try and leave a distance between your fruits and your vegetables. So for me personally, I usually like to have a big salad before my lunch. So a big salad, and then preferably I'll have also steamed vegetables with the rest of my cooked food. So you're making sure that you're covering all your bases. If for whatever reason you're not able, at least have some salad or have some steamed veg with your meal on a daily basis.
Thank you. My last question is that having difficulty giving up sugar. Now, sugar's in everything. You know, that's a big one for most people. Not so keen on the sweeteners. So this person wants to know, what else can they have?
Wow, that's a difficult one. You know, I think the first thing to do is to understand what sugar does. That sugar destroys the immune system. It literally does that. And right now we all need high immunity to be able to, you know, fend off any viruses, especially as we go into the winter months. So I would definitely encourage you to cut back on sugar. So if you're using 2 to 3 teaspoons in your tea or in your other, you know, drinks, try 1.5. Just cut it right back. And try maple syrup. Some people say, well, maple syrup has a taste. Okay, try honey, agave syrup. Although these are just as sweet, they do have some nutritive value that is slightly more than your regular sugar. Okay, some people actually like blackstrap molasses. I think that is your best bet because it is packed full of nutrients and it has a slightly sweet taste as well. But it is an acquired taste for most people. So the first protocol is cut back on sugar, replace with other sweetness. Sometimes it's even good to replace with fruits. So if you're making something, instead of using sugar, use fruits like dates and raisins to help with, you know, making it slightly sweeter. It's a little bit more healthy than all that sugar.
That's great. Jackie, I want to thank you very much for your presentation this evening. We've got lots of food for thought there. So thank you once again. I'll now hand over to Lesmond.
Thank you, Juliet and Jackie, for making my mouth water, Jackie, thinking about the foods that you talked about. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Some really good combinations. Okay, want to welcome you all this evening. Last night we looked at addiction in all its forms, and tonight we're going to be looking at anxiety. We're joined by Dr. David Ajayo, who is a graduate of Loma Linda University in physiology, and whilst there he also studied and researched brain trauma. He's currently switching to clinical medicine, and he's at the University of Nottingham currently. So just want to welcome David today, who's going to present to you now on anxiety. Thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brother Lesmond. Hello, everyone, and good evening once again. It's a privilege to be with you. As already introduced, the topic for tonight is dealing with anxiety. It is yet another mental health disorder or mood disorder that is quite rampant and quite prevalent in our society. More so, again, in the times in which we live, a lot of people are quite anxious about their health, about their economic well-being, about their family, and so forth. So we are going to delve into it. I'm not going to bore you with too much statistics, but it's worth knowing that every single year, 1 in 6 individuals in the UK will have a major episode of anxiety disorder every single year. It's slightly more in ladies, in women, than in men. 1 in 5 of women will have some episode, whereas about 1 in 7 or 8 men will have it. And lifetime risk for having an anxiety disorder is upwards of 25%. So it's really, really rife and rampant in the society. Not unlike addiction, which we talked about yesterday, anxiety is also very much on the rise in the young people, especially 16 to 24-year-olds. A lot of them are coming down with anxiety-related disorders, which usually tags along with depression and so many other mental health maladies. It's also worth knowing, I'll move on after giving you the statistics, it's worth knowing that out of every 100 individuals dealing with anxiety disorder, only 12 will access any form of treatment, okay? Only 12 out of 100. And that begs the question, what do the rest of the people, 88 out of the 100, what do they do? Some of them will avoid it, avoid talking about it, and it become very chronic problems. Some of them maybe access some self-help programs and so forth. But just to throw that out there, that a number of people are undiagnosed, they're going undiagnosed. So the statistics I've given to you are from those who presented to the clinic. Now, there are different forms of anxiety, but the first question we need to ask ourselves is, what exactly is anxiety disorder? I mean, every one of us must have had occasions where you're stressed about something, where you're anxious about something. Maybe you're a student and you're about to present a paper to face the audience, and your heart is just thumping and you're feeling that palpitation, or your palms are sweaty, and your heart is racing, or you're even short of breath, you're hyperventilating. So many of us have had occasions like that. And that is quite okay, because what you're experiencing is what we call eustress, okay? It is a normal level of stress. And we actually need that minimal level of stress to optimize our performance, to focus very well, okay? However, it becomes problematic when that anxiety is not just acute. In other words, after your presentation is finished, you still continue to be anxious. You still cast your mind back to that event, and you just feel with trepidation, with terror, about it, so much so that next time when you're supposed to present, you avoid it completely. Now, that is becoming problematic. And for some people, avoidance, in fact, for majority of people who have anxiety disorders, and avoidance is the go-to method they use. The problem with that is that avoidance will actually feed the anxiety, and it will become a self-perpetuating cycle and self-strengthening cycle, okay? So avoidance, even though it might give those individuals some temporary reprieve or relief, it's not the solution. It will actually end up fanning anxieties. Now, anxiety is characterized by intense and excessive and persistent worry and fear. And by the way, it's about everyday situations, situations that majority of people will handle without fretting too much, without being too worried about it. Individuals with anxiety-related disorders will be overly worried about it, to the point that it will actually cause behavioral changes, and it will cause changes in their day-to-day life. It will interfere with their day-to-day activities. So most people who are dealing with anxiety, depending on the kind of anxiety they're dealing with, might avoid society altogether. They just stay at home, okay? Or they avoid crowd, or they avoid going to places that are high if they have phobias, for height, all sorts of forms of anxiety that people are dealing with. But again, anxiety should be dealt with head on, and I'm going to come to methods we can use to deal with it without trying to avoid it. There are ways of dealing with that. So it's characterized by that intense worry about everyday situation, and it will result in changes in mood, changes in thought, changes in physical symptoms, actually, and eventually it will result in changes in behavior, for the worse. So people who are dealing with anxiety, they have hyperactive hypothalamic pituitary axis. And I'll just explain for a minute what that is. HPA axis. I think maybe Dr. Magna Parks may have mentioned this. In our brain, I mentioned limbic structures yesterday. In that limbic system, we have something we call hypothalamus, which is like the master controller of most of the activities in our glands in the body. And hypothalamus produces a hormone when you're in a stressful situation, in a worrying situation, in a tense situation. That hormone is called corticotropin releasing hormone. And that hormone will stimulate another part of the brain called the pituitary to produce another hormone called ACTH. I'll just abbreviate that. So adrenocorticotropin hormone. That second hormone will travel in the bloodstream to the top of your kidneys. The top of your kidneys is where you have these glands called adrenal glands. And those glands produce a lot of hormones that regulate bodily functions. One of those hormones that adrenal gland will release as a result of ACTH is adrenaline. So people know it as epinephrine. Now, adrenaline is a stress hormone. A second hormone it will release is cortisol, okay? Cortisol is another very, very powerful stress hormone. Now, if those hormones are released in little quantity, your body can handle it, because what it would do is to make you be in a state of alertness, okay? You can focus, you can concentrate better, okay? That eustress state that I mentioned earlier. However, the problem comes when those adrenaline and those cortisol are being released consistently. So it becomes a chronic stressful state. And that's what will bring those physical symptoms, palpitations, sweaty palms and shortness of breath and even terror. Some people will start shaking, they will have this tremor that can be visible. So some people may have outbursts of panics, something we call panic attacks as a result of their anxiety. There are all sorts and all forms of anxiety. So how do clinicians usually diagnose anxiety? I've actually mentioned a number of those symptoms that they look out for, but people have to have 2 or more of those symptoms for more than 6 months. So if you have it for more than half of 6 months, so if you have it for more than 90 days in a 180-day period, you may be diagnosed with anxiety-related disorders. It usually tags along also with sleeping difficulties. So that's one thing to take note of. And people may have muscle aches and soreness and irritability and anger. People may become fatigued quite easily. They may become restless and quite edgy. All these symptoms are things to look out for. It's very important to note that the mind and the body are connected. That's something we call psychosomatic connection. So when the mind is sick, with anxiety, with depression, with addiction, it does affect the body, and vice versa. If you look at a number of people who have chronic illnesses, rheumatoid arthritis, heart conditions, renal conditions, their kidneys not functioning properly, they usually come down with anxiety-related disorders or depression could tag along as well, because the body and the mind are connected. Hence, the need to take an integrated approach to addressing anxiety and other mood disorders that we've spoken about. I've spoken about the neurobiology of anxiety, but take note that some of the neurotransmitters I mentioned yesterday, dopamine, is also involved in anxiety. Serotonin, I mentioned that yesterday briefly as well, that is involved in anxiety. There are others like GABA and epinephrine and so forth. Now, the behavior that feeds anxiety can override the prefrontal cortex. Some of you are tuned in yesterday will remember I mentioned that the frontal part of your brain is the seat of self-will and executive function. That is where you make decisions and you abide by the decisions. The neurobiology of anxiety is such that the hormones that are being produced as a result of that constant worry can override that system. So in other words, the person becomes almost imprisoned to anxiety constantly. Okay, let's talk about, let me just mention briefly, just for 1 minute, some of the risk factors for anxiety. People who are grieving, people who are mourning loss. And by the way, it's not just loss of loved ones, but it could be loss of jobs. Imagine people in this economic climate where a lot of people, if they're not on furlough, they've probably lost their jobs or lost hours. this triggers grieving process, and that can make them much more prone to anxiety. People who have other medical conditions, I mentioned that earlier on, people who are addicted to either substances or activities they shouldn't be addicted to, it can make them more prone to addiction. To anxiety rather. Not having proper nutrition, Sister Jackie has mentioned a number of very good food. You can imagine somebody who is not taking in all those nutrients that we're supposed to have. That can make people prone to that. People also in their early years, whilst growing up, they might have been exposed to some traumatic conditions. And so that makes them develop PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorders. And that usually tags along also with anxiety-related disorders. There's also a little bit of genetic component to it, because studies have shown that people who have first-degree relatives who have anxiety-related disorders usually tend to be more prone to having it. That's not to say you will automatically have it, but they have higher susceptibility for anxiety-related disorders. One more thing, those who work shift at work, day shift, night shift, if you alternate between those shifts all the time, it can make you much more prone. So sleeping very well is very, very important. So if you do night shift and you stick with it, your body can actually adjust. But if you alternate all the time, then your circadian rhythm will go off balance. What can we do about addiction? There are so many things I can talk about, but I'm just looking at time right now. So I'll just give you a few things. Some of the things we've talked about before include CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. You have to approach anxiety-related disorders in a holistic manner. You have to treat not just the biology, but the cognition, the psychology, so to speak. You also have to have a social intervention strategy. So the family and friends and maybe community have to come to play in treating anxiety-related disorders. So the mind has to be taught how to deal with those problems. Instead of avoiding the problem, CBT will enable the clinician to challenge the thought processes of that individual. So that individual can actually start dealing with the problem in very little ways. So there's something also called exposure therapy. If the person is fearful, say fearful of public speaking or fearful of being in public places, like social anxiety, that person can be exposed gradually, and it will build their confidence, it will build their resilience, they will get their willpower back, and hopefully they will overcome addiction as a result of that. Another thing I'll mention is exercise. I mentioned that about addiction yesterday. I'm sure Dr. Parks mentioned that about depression also. Exercise is really, really important. Physical activity. And by the way, when we talk about exercise, I'm not talking about you going on a 10-mile marathon. It doesn't need to be a 10-mile. It could just be brisk walking, okay? Just brisk walking for 15 to 30 minutes, around your neighborhood, maybe in parks, in nature. It will boost the production of those neurotransmitters, and it will help your brain remain very, very calm. You must have heard of something called runner's high, whereby all those serotonin, dopamine, endorphins, oxytocin are being produced, and you feel really, really good in yourself. It usually has calming effect for the rest of the day if you do that. Staying hydrated is very important. Journaling also has been shown to be something that is very, very important. The last two things I will mention, first is meditation. When you meditate, you can actually focus your mind. And maybe there will be questions on that later on. I can delve deeper into that. By the way, when you meditate, you have to meditate on good things. Now, there are some forms of meditation out there where people promote just making your mind go blank. And so being open to all sorts of suggestions. I will not recommend that, because that in and of itself comes with a lot of dangers and risk, which I may emphasize on later on. The last thing is SWOT analysis. SWOT stands for strengths, weakness, opportunities, and threats. Okay. For every single situation you deal with, you can analyze what are the strengths I have to deal with this situation. What are my weaknesses, which I need to work on to strengthen? What are the opportunities? What are the risks I need to be, I need to take note of in this particular situation? So there are ways to deal with anxiety-related disorders, and even people who are clinically anxious, a lot of people have overcome this using natural methods. There are some pharmacological techniques as well. However, those have been shown even clinically. Most clinicians will tell you that a lot of those may not be as effective at addressing the root cause of anxiety-related disorders, and they come with side effects, of course. You can overcome anxiety. That's the message I want you to take away. And if there are any questions, I will be happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Really appreciate that. So in your last statement, you said by way of tablets, pharmacology, and so on, it's not really proving very effective. Why then in the 70s, 80s, and prior to that, was everybody locked up with these types of challenges?
Okay. Actually, it's not just in the 70s and 80s alone. Even currently, in the UK and indeed all over the Western world, pharmacotherapy is still being used to try and address mood disorders. Now, two things. First, the studies that those associations with pharmacotherapy is based are not the strongest of studies. There's something in science we call causative studies versus associative studies. Okay, so what those pharmacotherapy like benzodiazepines and your SSRIs, those are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. What they're based on is scientists look at images of the brain. They look at chemicals that are increased or decreased when somebody is anxious, and they say, oh, this chemical is decreased. For instance, serotonin is decreased. What can we do? What drug can we give to boost serotonin level? And so that is an associative study. There has been no study that actually proves that the reduction of serotonin is the cause of anxiety-related disorder or depression. Rather, what studies are showing that is that it is one of the outcomes of it. In other words, it's not the root cause. It's just one of the effects of it. So boosting serotonin through pharmacological means may not necessarily solve the problem. And indeed, for many patients, there are massive side effects. Some patients have to give up that drug, particularly, and go into CBT. Very interesting. In the UK, the first form of treatment now amongst patients is CBT, even more than pharmacotherapy. It used to be that they just hand out those antidepressants and benzodiazepines like sweets, but now clinicians themselves are realizing that you need to really address the root cause. Teach the person how to think differently, teach the person how to become much more resilient, and that combined maybe with some pharmacotherapy will work better than just pharmacotherapy alone. Exercise is also something that some clinicians are urging, but in medical school, I'm in medical school, these things are now being emphasized than it was, say, 5 years ago. I think science is catching up to something that we have known for a long time, actually.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. Somebody's mentioned as a question, how much exercise? So an individual's talking about walking 2 hours a day. Is that too much or is that good enough?
Okay, if somebody hasn't been used to exercising before, personally, I wouldn't recommend 2 hours to start with. It's just like with many things, you have to build your level of tolerance to that exercise. So I mentioned earlier that even starting with 20 to 30 minutes of walking will be a good way to start. There are some forms of exercise that will increase your cardiovascular strength, whereby you actually exercise very, very intensely. Even studies that I've seen recommend that for those exercises, you don't want to go beyond 30 to 45 minutes because you can actually wear yourself out. Now, if it is long distance walking, that's different. If you're just brisk walking and maybe you walk some trail, some people have done those for an hour or 2 hours before, but they're going at regular pace. It's not a high intensity exercise. So everything has to be balanced. And of course, if the person has certain underlying conditions, you want to be very, very careful. So someone with, say, heart condition, you really need to take that stepwise approach and not overwhelm yourself with too much exertion.
Okay, thank you. Somebody's commented that working nights and shift patterns can shorten your life. That's just a comment. Do you want to add anything to that, Doctor?
I mean, it's just to reinforce what I said earlier. Studies have shown, a lot of studies actually, in depression, in anxiety, in different types of mood disorders. One of the key risk factors is lack of sleep or changing the pattern of sleeping. Particularly about shortening life. I have read some things about that, but I can't quote that for certain right now. But it is true that it does reduce the quality of life, indeed, and it might end up maybe shortening life.
You also mentioned about women having higher anxiety levels. Mm-hmm. Somebody suggesting, is that because of their hormones?
Okay, there are a number of things when it comes to
and the menopause. Their hormones and the menopause.
And menopause, of course, yeah. That's where I'm actually heading to in terms of the estrogen levels, for women. So estrogen has been studied, especially over the past 20 to 30 years, intensely, and it seems that it actually confers protection for women against so many diseases. Do you know women are less prone to having stroke before menopause because of estrogen levels? They are less prone to having osteoporosis before menopause because of estrogen. Whereas if you look at women after the age of 45, 50, they are much more prone to having those things because then estrogen level is much more reduced because they're now menopausal. So there has been a lot of links to menopause, and it could well be that one of the things they are susceptible to that makes them susceptible to anxiety-related disorder is estrogen. But studies again have shown that association, that estrogen, the protective effect is removed when women reach that menopausal age. There could be other things as well. Women usually, take care. I know this may not be politically correct nowadays, but still, women take care of their home a lot. So they have a lot of things on their mind, a lot of worries. That's not to say that men don't. We do have our worries as well, but we tend to switch off much more easily, so to speak, compared to women. So a lot of those anxieties, a lot of those worries might play on their mind. So for those of you listening who have spouses, take care of the women. It's very, very important. Make sure you share the burden, with them and share the task with them.
Okay, it would seem that somebody's definitely been listening. They've said that during lockdown they've been walking between 7 and 10 o'clock, and they've found that they've lost a great deal of weight. That's excellent.
Very good.
You mentioned before about young people and children becoming anxious. I'm just wondering, is that a societal thing? You're saying that many of them, it's happening to lots of young people. Is that a societal thing? Is something going on in society? Obviously, yes, we're in lockdown, but I think you're talking about before lockdown even started.
Yeah.
So what is the problem? What's really sitting behind this rise in anxiety?
Well, it's multifactorial. One of it, for instance, is detachment. Because usually now both dad and mom are working, so young people are being left on their own much more at younger age than it used to be. It used to be that at least somebody will be at home to take care of them and so forth. So that detachment, some psychologists have inferred that may be causing a rise in anxiety. Also, things that young people are exposed to. When I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, there are things I wasn't exposed to until, I was 20, 30. Yep. Now, young people, at very, very young age, they can solve their phone and so forth. And, we give them all these smartphones. And if we don't put proper control on those things, if they're exposed too early, it will just predispose them to developing anxiety. I spoke about body dysmorphia yesterday, whereby, young people on social media will start second guessing the way their body looks. And it may even lead some people down the path of anorexia or bulimia. So all these things are feeding their anxiety. Peer pressure in school is another thing, feeding anxiety. You see how your mates are behaving. And if you don't go along with that behavior, you might even be bullied So a number of things are causing it. So as parents, we really, really need to look out for our young people. Very important.
Somebody's saying, I find myself having a panic attack. What should I do?
Okay. If you found yourself having panic attacks, it depends on the frequency and the regularity. And even if it's spaced apart, the first thing to do is to reach out to somebody who can help you. Talk to your GP first and foremost. There are also people, even within religious communities, within civic organizations, there are organizations in the community that can help you because there are self-help strategy. But reaching out about it is very, very important. Now, if you want to deal with it on your own, there are strategies to use. Some of the things I've mentioned, exercise, meditation, cognitive behavioral therapy. For cognitive behavioral therapy, of course, you need to reach out to somebody who's a counselor who is trained in doing that. But you can actually overcome that panic attack. Try and not, with panic attacks, actually, it's happens suddenly. So usually it's for situations you haven't planned. But for some people, there may be a pattern to it. It may be in certain situations, you are much more prone to having panic attacks. So I will also encourage the person to journal, write down, try and see if there's a pattern, anything that triggers, that attack. And then when you're meeting a professional, you can tell them.
Sorry, doctor, I'm going to have to stop you there. I do apologize. I appreciate that you're trying to help somebody, but we have gone over time, so I'm really sorry about that. We're going to have to pass on to the next presenters. Really thank you for being with us. Are you with us tomorrow?
No, Dr. Parks is with you, but I'll be on
tomorrow. Just want to thank you for being with us. For those of you who can give a clap or a thumbs up for the doctor, really appreciate that. Okay.
Thank you,
I want to thank you for being with us, and I'm going to hand over now to Joseph Philpotts, who's going to lead us into our third section. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you to Lesmond. Thank you to Dr. David for the presentation. I certainly found it really, really, really interesting. My wife's a psychotherapist, and so oftentimes we have these sorts of conversations around the dinner table and in our home. And so, Dr. David, I really appreciated what you were sharing this evening. So we're moving now into the last phase, the last stage, the last part of our conversation this evening, which is now just examining a philosophical question, something we've looked at mental health, our physical health, and now maybe examining our spiritual health. And it's definitely a question that I'm pretty excited about listening to, learning more about, and really digging into with our presenter this evening. Our presenter this evening, let me introduce him first before I come to the question. His name is Mike Simpson, and Mike is currently the evangelism coordinator for the North England Conference. He's a man who likes his history, he likes writing, he likes people, and I'm not sure whether I've said this in order, but he also likes cricket as well. He's a big cricket fan, and he's a man of one wife with two grown adult sons. What he didn't share with me that I'd like to just add to that is he's a man that, at least for myself, I've worked with for the last 10 or so years, and from afar and close up, he's somebody that I've personally mimicked a lot of things from and learned a lot from, a man of much experience. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation with Mike this evening. So Mike, let me ask the question that we've got for this evening. I'll ask the question, put a little bit of flesh onto it, and then we'll ping it your way to see what you've got to share with us on it. So the question is really, it's got a couple of parts to it. The question is, are we really sinners? Are we really sinners? Is that not depressing? So kind of like those two questions come together as maybe part A of the question. Are we really sinners? Is that not depressing? And the second part of the question is humanity not morally, socially, and intellectually progressive? Is humanity morally, socially, and intellectually progressive? I know this is a big subject, and I know that, Mike, there's probably a lot that you can say on this, but if I can just put a little bit of flesh on the bones, maybe for our visitors, those that are listening, and maybe this is a new concept or a new subject that maybe they're hearing for the first time this evening. You know, Christians, I guess, are really concerned, or you could even maybe argue are obsessed with using this word sinner. You know, it's a word that is in their vocabulary, and it comes up when you go to church, when you listen to sermons, when you listen to presentations. This word sinner. It's a concept that comes up quite regularly, and you see it in pop culture all the time. You see this word being referenced in movies, you see it in TV programs, The Simpsons and other places as well. And it's this idea that we're bad people. And yet the irony, I guess, is that the Bible is full of so many immoral things, and yet the idea for a Christian is that you're supposed to use this book now as a moral guide in your own life. You know, societies where it is today, we're not in a better position today than we have been in the past, and yet religion is also at the same time on the decline. So are we not finding ourselves as people becoming more moral as religion is now out of the equation a little bit more? So it's a really fascinating question. Mike, I want to come over to you just for a few minutes. Give us the bedrock of this conversation, and I'm looking forward to the questions that are going to come in on the chat and on YouTube, and as we really dig into this evening.
Hi, Joe. So, Joe, thank you so much. I'm not sure if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Yes, looking forward to this discussion this evening, actually. A number of questions that you've asked, which is very, very intriguing, indeed, about sin. Are we really sinners? And about depression, thinking about oneself as a sinner. And I would like to jump into the Bible here, but before I go to the Bible, let me say that there's much discussion about this in philosophy, basically. A number of different theories are out there. There's even one theory called the construct for morality without God, from philosophy, which is very intriguing, you know. But let me say from the outset where I stand and where I believe I should stand is that I believe that that we are sinners. Okay, so I put my hand up there and declare that now. Now, why do I say that? Well, I trust the Bible, I believe the Bible, and I believe that there is a God. All right. For example, Romans 3 verse 23 tells us that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. That is a very blanket statement that covers everyone, basically. One of the interesting arguments about this is, wow, then what about babies? Babies, are they born with sin or without sin from the outset? What do you say? Well, we'll come on to that in a moment, actually. But from the outset, the Bible is clear on the position of what we call the nature of mankind, the nature of humanity. The Bible says our nature is of such that we need a savior. All right. When we mention the word sin, automatically we're talking about morality. We're talking about ethics, and that leads to the idea that there is a God, because there is no construct in evolution for being a moral person. You cannot get out of chaos. One cannot get order. One cannot get morality out of that which is chaotic. Are you with me? So the moment we mention sin, we are talking about morality, and therefore talking about God. Romans 6:23 says that the wages of sin is death, but God's gift is eternal life. Now, in that text, we have a kind of a juxtaposition of two worlds. We have death on one side, and then we have life on the other side. So in Romans 6 and verse 23, what is introduced there is the concept of choice, that the human person, though we are sinners, we have a choice. We have a choice because there is death on one side and there is the gift of God on the other side that equates to life. So it is not all depressing. It is not all downtrodden. There is hope indeed, and there is a way out. Now, one would be depressed if, for example, somebody came to me and gave me a prescription, a diagnosis of myself, and then there is no medicine. There is no, better way. I heard Jackie presenting the better way. There is no natural remedy for me. I said, what? So are you telling me that I will live like this forever? And at the end, there is nothing. But the text, Romans 6, introduces to us the idea of choice. Brilliant. Romans 5:12, for example, says, therefore, just as though one man sin entered, therefore, just as though one man sin entered, the Bible says, the world, then death through sin, and thus death passed, are you with me, or spread to all men because all have sinned. So the result of our condition, and sometimes some folks may say, well, I don't think what you're about to say is exactly fair. What I'm about to say is this, that the condition that we find ourselves in came as an accident in the creation narrative. The creation narrative, basically, there is a punctured tire as we are traveling, and that punctured tire, that accident, is the introduction of sin through the fall of our foreparents, Adam and Eve. So that accident was not supposed to be there in the first place. So we then ask the question, if that accident did not happen, what would be our natural state? Surely not a sinner. Are you with me? We would not have the sin condition if that accident was not there. So therefore, unless the one who created us, if he has no solution to the accident, then we are most depressed indeed. However, there is hope. Let me continue with this for a few more moments before moving on. 1 Corinthians 15 verses 21 to 22, for example, the Bible says, for since by one man death came, by man also came what? Resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all died, even so in Christ all shall be made alive. So here is a solution to the accident, to the punctured tire. There is a spare wheel, so to speak. There is a way to fix the accident, and that is through Jesus Christ. So in a world of potential depression, potential despair, there is light. And the light there, no pun, by the way, is Jesus Christ himself. Okay? Now, I really want to pick up something quickly before I know you're itching with some questions there, and so
I've got one or two questions lined up for you, Mike.
I'm trying to get through this. Okay, Psalm 58:3, because there are some folks who refuse to accept the idea that as human beings we have a nature with a tendency towards evil, going away from God. Okay, so Psalms 58:3 says, the wicked are estranged from the womb, talking about humanity basically. They go astray as soon as they are born, speaking lies. So here is this kind of a metaphor being used. There is this language being used that the idea of the human person tends to go astray it says there in the New King James Version, they move away from God. And that is crucial. The psalmist, for example, David, he was a man just like you and I, and had his strength and weakness just like you and I. And, you know, he got himself into some problems. And according to Psalm 51 and verse 5, he prays a prayer to God and he cries out to God. And he says, behold, I was what? I was brought forth in iniquity, okay? And in sin did my mother conceive me. So here again, we have the kind of a natural state of humanity is that there is sin, we are sinners. But the good news is this. The good news is this. And I like this passage of scripture so much. It is 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 21. It says, for he made him who knew no sin, speaking of Jesus, to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. This is a powerhouse text. So even though one can describe us, the human race, as sinners, we have this introduction into the narrative that Jesus Christ, in order for him to come and assist us, he became sin for us. He walked in my shoe. He lived in my world. He experienced the temptations I'm experiencing. And so now he's able to empower us that we can become the righteousness of God. Now, to me, that is wonderful. And here we go. 2 Corinthians 5, verse 17, Joe, listen to this one. This one is interesting. The Bible, Paul says, and you know, Paul was a murderer. Paul was one who premeditates things. I with me, with people, put people in prison because of his own ideology. He thought that he was right. How many of us today think that we are right and do things wrong? And so from his own perspective, you know, of righteousness or what he deems to be right, he did things. But then he concludes, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation, okay? All things have passed away, behold, all things are new. Paul here uses a very interesting Greek word. He uses the word kainos for the word new. There are two major words in Greek for a new. There is neos, which means numerically new. So you take a brand new car from the factory, from the showroom, no one has driven to it yet, 0 miles on it, and you can smell the leather in it, you can smell the newness in it. That is neos, okay, brand new, numerically new in time. Paul doesn't use that word. He uses the word kainos, new. My grandmother would say, brand new, secondhand. This is the new that has existed before, but now refurbished and is now presented as new as the brand new. So here now, the Bible declares that therefore, if anyone is in Christ, no longer a sinner, but a new creation, all things passed away, behold, all things have become new. The only place where we get that other language is to do with the heavens and the earth in Revelation chapter 21, when he will make all things new again, all right? Which is very interesting how that will happen. And so let me rush through this very quickly. Revelation 21 verse 5, behold,
Mike,
make all things new, okay? And then we do have Philippians 1 verse 6, being confident of this very thing. Paul says, be confident of this very thing, that he who has begun a good work in you, okay, will complete it until the day of Jesus Christ. So here I am, being described as a sinner. enough to make you cry and weep, put you down. However, in that narrative, we do have the idea that God is there for us. We are not alone. God is able to bring transformation to our very person. And one of the way, because, you know, transformation is key in this argument, because there are some who really, they try to construct another way to be morally fit or morally well without God. And that is impossible. Evolution does not give any way forward for a moral human being. Even Plato, for example, when you read Plato, Plato will describe the idea that the way that humanity should receive morality is through education. So we put ourselves through school, and if we school each other and we teach each other, then we can grow and grow and grow and become a moral being. But the word morality rests with God and God alone. He is the ultimate, and he is the one that can transform us from a state of being a sinner back to our fallen place of being sons of God and daughters of God. Let me rest there for now because time is going.
I appreciate the what you've shared so far, Mike, and maybe just kind of picking up on this narrative. I mean, you use that analogy of this punctured tire, and it was meant to be this way, but humanity got this punctured tire. And I think you said something to the effect of, I kind of tried to write it down quickly. Without God, we cannot have morality. That God is alone moral. But maybe when you look at the narrative or the timeline of humanity, you know, for hundreds and thousands of years, humanity has done some heinous things.
Yes.
But you look at the most recent things, you know, we've started to outlaw, you know, heinous acts, racial segregation, this idea that women and certain genders are less than others, and you shouldn't persecute based on religious affiliation and these sorts of things, and the way that society is moving. And just speaking broadly, because obviously these challenges are experienced in different places of the world, but you look at kind of where we are today, and we're in a better place than we were before, you know, and now we don't have religion. You know, religion has been used to cause so many wars and crimes, and has been used to spearhead the use of people as objects. But we're better today without religion. But you're making the claim that you know, only God can give us morality. But people can say, well, we have better morality in society than ever, and yet we have God the least. So how do we marry these two views together?
That's a very good point that you've put across, Joe. So the idea then that morality can come from a place outside of God is really absurd. It cannot happen. It cannot happen for a number of reasons. And I noted one of the popes. I can't remember, Pope Pius was it the 8th or something, or the 18th? I can't remember. But anyway, there was a group of people who came up with, in the Catholic Church, and they came up with the idea of philosophical sin, all right? Because they were trying to construct this world where morality from God is not needed or necessary. So they're trying to look at alternatives, philosophical sin. And they're saying that it is possible to commit some sins without offending God or breaking God's rule. And so these are what they call philosophical sin, by the way. Of course, they got nowhere with that because that construct would never work. Even the Pope himself declared that obnoxious and banned that some years ago, back in the 16th, 17th century. So what we have here, though, is the idea that if one seeks to be, okay, let's look at your question. about progression and development and forward thinking, and we are more moral now than ever before. One of the questions you've got to say, well, how are we judging that? What are the criteria for that judgment that the people in 2020 were, for example, more moral than people living in the, say, the 10th century or the 12th century? How can that be? How can we equate that? And the truth is, we can't. A group of philosophers came together with that very same thought. And in the end, you know what they said? They said, this cannot work. And they dropped the idea of that. And what they say, it is not whether or not we are more moral than the people before us. We need to look at things like, you know, how advanced we are in things like politics and commerce and technology. And so if you listen in the news and television and media today, we don't talk about how progressive we are as a nation or a people, but we talk about the technological developments of nations and the political advancements of nations. And so now we have shifted from judging a nation or a people by moral standards to judging a nation by the developments of technology and how, what did they say in the Americans election? One of the most advanced electoral systems in the world gone crazy. So we're not saying Mike, people are, but the things are you with me? Because one cannot actually get to the grips where we say, well, John who lives in 2020, he's more morally accountable or advanced than one who lived in the first century. We can't judge that.
Okay. So I appreciate what you're saying, that there isn't a litmus test that we can use to define what is morally right or morally wrong, or who is morally righter and morally wronger than the other. Right. So why don't we just get rid of this idea of morality altogether then? No longer are people defined as good or bad, because is it not unfair to define a person's status based on one or two actions when they have a lifespan of 70 years? Or do we really fit into this bracket of being a sinner when actually we do good and we can do good deeds? Let me just use that expression. So, you know, isn't it kind of absurd to kind of give somebody this status when at the end of the day, nobody is by definition good or evil, good or bad, but we do good or bad things maybe. So you're no longer defining the person, you're just defining the actions. So get rid of morality altogether then. Isn't that what you're proposing?
Well, interestingly, what you're saying, that looking at the postmodern world, for example, have we lost Joe? Oh, there you are. Looking at the postmodern world, in the postmodern construct of or narrative, they will say exactly that there is no really specifically global right or wrong, no universal right or wrong. There are what they call local or right that is just right for you as a person, or right for this country as a people, or for this family as a people. So things are broken down in components. So there's no global right and there's no global wrong. So if there is no such global things or universal righteousness or universal morality, throw away the Bible. And each person then live according to the dictates of what they think to be right, or what that group of people think to be right or true. And that is a very, very current argument that we have today. The problem that you have with that is that at some stage, somebody needs to stop at the red traffic lights, because you may say, well, I think green is for go and yellow is for go. And in my family, when we see a red light, it means to do 80 miles per hour. Are you with me? And so what we have then is a patchwork of morality that is only beneficial in that group or with that person or with that country. And so universality has gone, and we have nothing cohesive anymore. We go back to chaos, basically. And maybe, let me not say that.
But I appreciate that. I appreciate that. You know, if I can just, I guess, maybe pick out and summarize one or two of the key things that I've really heard you say this evening. You know, if we can scrap morality altogether, and then you end up in a bit part picture as to, you know, you think this is good, you think this is good, and maybe there are some merits in that, but oftentimes there's clashes. But I think the big thing, I guess, like you said towards the beginning, is even though in the biblical narrative we are defined, I guess, as being a sinner, we're not left in that state, are we? You know, I think, Mike, you know, it's not as if God just put us in this position and said, you know, you're a sinner, you're a bad person, that's it, there's no hope. There's an antidote to you know, the disease of sin. So I appreciate that's what you're sharing, and we look to Jesus in this biblical story as our hope of something more. Mike, really appreciate you tackling this big question. I know that it's a juicy one. I hope that for our listeners, they've been able to take something away, and I'm sure that if there are any other further questions, they can always write into us, and I'm sure that they can get the answers that they're looking for on another occasion. Well, I think that's it for us. Mike, thank you again. Let me hand it back over to Leroy as we continue on.
Okay, thanks, Joe, and a big thank you to all of our presenters this evening. You've given us lots of information once again, and really challenged our thinking. And to our viewers, if you have any thoughts on tonight's programme, please place them on the website. The website again is totaltransformationseminars.com. So thank you again for staying with us, and plan to join us again tomorrow evening. Good night.